Today's podcast is more of a description of two friends that have died within the last year. Two people who were hugely significant in my work life and my personal life. David Colvin and Bill McKitterick. These were two people who I counted as friends, mentors, and who contributed a huge amount to social work in the United Kingdom over many decades. In David Colvin's case, I'm terribly pleased to have been able to record an interview with his daughter, Iona Colvin, who herself has made a career in social work and who amazingly has also now risen to become Chief Social Work Advisor to the Scottish Government, as was David, her father, before her. And it was from him that I learned a huge amount, and I hope that the interview with Iona reflects the time and my feelings towards David. As for Bill, he was not only a friend and a huge influence on social work in the southwest of England, in fact all over, and members of the professional association as well, but he was a neighbour and he was a friend. And he, also as an author and as somebody, as a sounding board for me, was incredibly influential. And so in that case, of the two of them, it's been a very sad year. Anyway, let's play the interviews. Well, and welcome to the programme Iona Colvin, who joins us today. And we're going to talk a lot about your father, David Colvin, who passed away just about a year ago and who was one of the major figures of social work, not just in Scotland, but in the UK as well, and in the British Association of Social Workers and so many other places. So welcome to the programme, Iona.
Thank you very much, David. I'm delighted to be speaking to you.
Now, I know that you know the subject because you are now yourself the Chief Social Work Advisor to the Scottish Government. So there's a wee bit of knowledge within you as well about the subjects we're going to be talking about. But what I mean, in a family sense, what was the sort of first kind of memories or group of memories that you remember about your dad's work? I mean, was it colleagues coming home? Was it him talking about it? Was it just coming in with a sense of injustice and how to right the world? Or how did it actually kind of come into your consciousness as a child?
Well, I think as a family we moved around quite a lot because we kind of obviously followed Dad in terms of the job. So I've got a vague memory of being a very small child in Glasgow, and that's when he coincides with when he worked in the probation service, and actually very close to where I now live in Pollokshields in Glasgow, funnily enough. But I suppose my first awareness was when I was quite young, and both my sister and brother were born, we moved to Dumfries. And we lived in the grounds of Crichton Royal Hospital, which was a mental health hospital. And yeah, so we lived in the grounds of the hospital in a place called the Bungalow. And next door to us was Dr. Keith Wardrobe and his family. And it was a brilliant place to live as a kid because it was kind of like, in the fields and in the grounds of the hospital were beautiful. And every night at 5 o'clock, there was a hooter that went, and the patients, I presume, went back to their wards, and the families got to go to the hospital swimming pool and swim in the swimming pool. And I guess there was this kind of like, it was a great place to grow up, but it was a kind of awareness that your dad worked in the hospital, and that slowly, I suppose, that he was involved in the kind of social work side of things. And social justice was a recurring theme throughout my childhood.
Always was in his life, wasn't it, anyway?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, I've got to declare at this point anyway that I was a I was very fond of your father, and he was almost like a kind of a mentor to me as well. So I mean, I've got all the memories. When you say little bits there, things come back to me as well. But in the hospital you talked about, I mean, did you get a sense as a child that he wasn't like a medical doctor or anything like that, or did you imagine that he was, or was it because it was a psychiatric unit, wasn't it, that he worked on?
Yeah, it was psychiatric unit. No, I never thought he was a doctor. I always knew he was a social worker, so he must have told me that. So I've always known that, and always involved in politics outside of the job as well as in social work. So just that, I kind of, and his friends were quite a lot of them were involved in politics at that point. It was Labour Party politics, but the also people like Nancy Young and Sheila Ross, who were friends in Dumfries, who both taught social work at Jordan Hill.
All people.
So all people, and they came every Saturday night, and there was just a crowd of people around and I guess they all just talked about stuff.
It's interesting you say that. It's amazing the coincidences, because I remember these names, but I mean, I think partly of it because I went to Jordan Hill College School. And kind of was I was the guinea pig for loads of people at the college. They were coming down to practice on the pupils. And your dad then, he moved on, didn't he, to Paisley in Glasgow, in the family service unit, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah. So he joined. I think it might have been called the Child and Family Welfare Unit or something at that point. And at that point, I think that I don't know if he was the team leader or whatever. He worked with Joyce Minnis, who I later came across as Joyce taught social work at Paisley. And I went to Paisley, but I didn't study social work at Paisley, but I came across Joyce Minnis, and I remember, and Morag Falls, in fact, and them both speaking to me about my dad. But yeah, so he worked in children and families, and we lived in a council house in Hunters Hill. And so by that time there were 4 of us, 4 kids, and we lived next door to a family called the Forbes family, and they fostered kids. So and there was we had a lot of interaction with the Forbeses. They were great, like they fostered kids. They also ended up adopting quite a few of the kids, and so it was quite a kind of lively interface.
You were quite steeped then, weren't you, in kind of experiences of lots of different bits of social work at that time?
Yes. And those were the days well, in fact, we have returned to this a bit more these days, but those were the days when you did things like you took the kids on holiday and we went to Arran, for example. My sister and I went with my dad when the local children's home. I think there was about 30 or 40 of us in total. Went to Arran and slept in the church hall in Lumlash on camp beds, and I say, for a long time in the last maybe 20 years, that wasn't something that happened, and then these days it is something that happens, that people, social workers do take kids away, and they are part of that.
Full circle again.
Yeah,
and also, since you mentioned it, you were director of social work over in Ayrshire, and wasn't Arran part of your territory, as it were?
Yeah,
I remember that. Yeah.
Strangely. It was a bit strange to go through Lumlash and think, I've been here before, which I remembered, because everybody that lived in the West went to Arran at some point. But yeah, I went and had a look at the Lumlash Church Hall.
Knowing your dad's work and so on, I mean, can you remember when you first decided to go into social work? Was it just some kind of an absorption, or was there an actual kind of moment of kind of realization?
No, there was quite a lot of resistance, basically.
From your dad?
No, from me.
Oh, from you, right, okay.
My dad wanted me to be a social worker. And like many young people, of course, when you're about to leave school, you haven't got a clue what you want to do. So, and I was never I was never very good at studying just because I always had other things that you had to do, as we do. And anyway, so then I was trying to decide what to do, and he kind of was saying, why don't you go to Paisley? Because at that point, Paisley was teaching undergraduate social work course, which is very unusual. So they did you did 4 years and you got an ordinary degree in social services, social sciences, and what was then wasn't a diploma in social work. What was it before then?
But before CQSW it was, wasn't it?
CQSW, that's what it was.
Which is what I have.
Yeah. So I went to Paisley and because basically couldn't think of anything else to do, and it meant I could leave home. Not that I want, but there was five kids at that point, and I thought I want to go and do something on my own. So I went to Paisley, but I ended up doing the honours degree in social science. But my dad was obviously at that point was kind of like, you should do social work, and we had a bit of debate about that. And I didn't do it till later.
But you were the only one of the 5 that did social work, weren't you?
Yeah, formally, yes, but both my sisters are in the caring professions. My sister Katrina's a nurse, a mental health nurse, and then trained as a psychologist. And my sister Susan has worked in homelessness services all her life. So both sisters are kind of heavily involved.
I mean, if it's sister disciplines, I get that. I'm just saying, but you were the only one that actually specifically went into social work. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So, okay, at what point then, what was your father doing when you first kind of qualified? Can you remember where he was at that point? Was he at that point in the Scottish office, or was that before then?
No, he was in the Scottish office. Joined the Scottish office when I was just in primary school, basically. He came through to Edinburgh to work in the Scottish office round about the time, well, it's 68, for the 68 Kilbrandon Act, the Kilbrandon Report. He was involved in that, and then he was involved in the Social Work Scotland, the 1968 Social Work Scotland Act. And he worked with Betty Jones, who was then in charge of whatever Social Work Services Group, I think it was called at that point. And no, so it was quite a long time on, and then I think he was actually the chief social work officer, chief social work advisor for Scotland by the time, because I went and I went straight into work. I worked in the voluntary sector for a couple of years, and then I worked for maybe 8-9 years in local government, in social work, in addiction services, before I actually was seconded and I did my qualification at Glasgow University. I did a postgraduate diploma in social work.
Right, when was that, Iona, may I ask? Glasgow University?
89, 91, that time, kind of time.
Right.
So, yeah.
Did your father? I mean, was it ever a kind of a awkward? Was there ever any awkwardness about the fact that you were a Colvin, and here was Colvin, the top social worker in Scotland?
Well, as long as I avoided his friends, it was right. It was, I worked in Strathclyde I worked in Strathclyde and then Glasgow City for 26 years. So, I came across people like Bob Winter and Fred Edwards and folk like that who, these guys together all forged social work in Scotland. They were instrumental in developing the whole of social work. So, and my dad and Bob Winter, for example, were very friendly for quite a long time, and he was good friends with Fred for a long time as well. So it was fine as long as you kept your head down and out of their way.
Yes, I remember Fred Edwards. He was director of social work for Glasgow for quite some time, wasn't he?
Strathclyde.
Was it Strathclyde?
Strathclyde, yes.
Right. But your father, I know, always talked about him. I remember that. Just one of these names that always kept coming up.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, he went on, and I mean, after he was in that post for quite a long time. I remember he kept saying to me, one of his favourite phrases was, "I've seen off 6 secretaries of state." He kept saying that, as if it was a kind of a badge of honour. I think, to be honest, he seemed to me that he was always very, very clever man, but he was always kind of slightly wary of politicians. Would that be fair?
Don't know.
Yeah.
I think he was. I mean, to be honest, I don't know, because he was involved in politics all his life. Well, until he became a senior civil servant, at which point, of course, he wasn't allowed to be involved in politics. So, but yeah, I think those were the times that we had probably quite. Like the politics were volatile, so it changed quite considerably, and yeah. You would have a different approach, perhaps.
It was the continuity
to the
issue,
of social work. Yes.
The politicians came and went. I think that was the thing, and he knew that, and at the same time, and some shone more while they were there than others, I guess, and I think that's just obvious, But he was there, and he was the continuity, and that kind of I can remember that sort of being very much kind of. How he seemed to view things. At least that's how I read it. He never said it outright to me, but that's how I read it. He was involved with NCH Action for Children for quite some time, wasn't he? He was their kind of honorary chair, wasn't he?
Yes, I think so. Yes, he was. I don't know that much about what he did at that point. He was involved in NCH Action for Children. He was involved with SACRO for quite a long time.
Yes.
And criminal justice, particularly criminal justice social work, never left him really. That is where he started, in the probation service, and he always returned there. But yeah, he was involved with children's services as well.
Now, when I first met him, when he was working for British Association of Social Workers in Scotland, as it was then, he was totally passionate and committed, and just in the drop of a hat took on board the charity that I had started called Action on Child Exploitation, AIC, or as he kept calling it, ACH.
Well, that being Scottish pronunciation, David, then you should know that.
No, I know, but he knew that. And I think it was just his tongue-in-cheek way of kind of keeping me on the ground, But no, he was passionate, and together we went down and we confronted the minister down in Westminster, and we did this and we did that, and we went to international conferences and so forth. And he just totally came on board, and it was just so inspiring, I found. I brought all the weight of his expertise in terms of meetings and so on. He was quite a formidable debater as well. But he was also involved with St Columba's Hospice, wasn't he? From 98, I've got these lists in front of me, but in 98 to 2003, he was quite involved there. And the disability issues were important to him. The Scottish Disability Foundation and the Eric Liddell Centre in Edinburgh. These are all names that the amount of things he got involved with was just incredible.
I know. Yeah. Well, he never did anything by halves, basically. Whether it was about work and about things that he believed in, or whether it was about other things. I'm thinking about, my youngest brother Angus is 12 years younger than me, and I suppose by the time Angus was up and about and doing things, the rest of us had left home, so it was like I don't know. Right. I suppose like a second go at having kids, almost. And they did everything from learning to glide to learning to scuba dive to, you name it, they did it. And that's what he was like.
I mean, Angus
went for everything full tilt. That was kind of like what he was like, I suppose.
Well, he also had a keen interest in the arts, didn't he, all through his life? And of course, with a lot of your family are incredibly artistic. I mean, your mother and Callum, and Angus, design the whole thing. And he was so kind of involved with that. And he actually, at one point, was chairman of the exhibiting societies of Scottish artists, wasn't he, for some time there, trying to sort of... Unfortunately, politics got in the way a lot with that, but he did an awful lot for the three societies, didn't
he? Yeah, because my mum's an artist, and basically she had gone to art school later on after we'd all kind of grown up. So and she had wanted all our life to be an artist, really, because I can remember as kids we were made to pose and while she painted our portraits,
Right,
which
okay,
wasn't
well,
something we
well.
were particularly enamoured with, but anyway. And then when I think when Angus was certainly in his late teenage, I think she went to art school and she got her degree, and then kind of that was a different life for her. And Dad got involved in helping to organise things as he does or did. He's a bit of an organiser, so yeah. And helping to sort out the work around the exhibition of Scottish artists, crafts and guilds, I think it was as well.
All right.
Because my mother is an embroiderer. She's not a painter. So,
but she's a wonderful embroiderer. I think you forgot.
Yes.
I forgot.
Well, I'm standing here looking at one of her pieces of work at the moment and thinking, I would defy many of us to be able to do the kinds of things that she can do. And yes, my brother is a professor of fine art in Dundee, and had always wanted to be an artist from a very young age. And my dad was completely supportive of that, and obviously very, very proud of him. And then later on, Angus Angus now teaches design as well.
And Angus is based in Moscow now, isn't he?
Yes.
All over the place, yes. But you're doing good things. I'll tell you one thing though about the art though. I think one of the times that your dad was quite, was happiest was when he could combine the artwork, after, because this is after he retired, from the social work world. But when he organised the exhibition at the Royal Scottish Academy, I think is that the one in Princess Street.
Yes.
I approached him because I was working for the Quarriers at the time.
Oh, right, yeah.
And I approached him and said, look, a lot of the children in some of the Quarriers' homes had actually done an art competition. Could they exhibit at the same time, along with the artists at the annual event in the Royal Scottish Academy? And he threw himself into that, and it was wonderful, and we did. And we had an exhibit of all these kids' work there, and a lot of them were kind of kids with learning difficulties, disabilities, challenges in life themselves, and the work they produced was fantastic, and the families were over the moon at what your dad actually had driven through and managed to arrange, and it was just wonderful. So he managed to do that combination there. I'll always remember that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yourself, Iona, here we are now, and I know you keep quite rightly saying it is a different world that you inhabit in terms of, your job as Chief Social Work Advisor to the Scottish Government from what your father was when he was actually to the, Chief Social Work Advisor of the Scottish Office then. But, I mean, can you put your finger on it, much of the differences at all between then and now? And I mean, because people will say, my goodness, what a coincidence, what an incredible coincidence, like father, like daughter, come through and actually be the top social worker in Scotland. But I mean, there are big differences now, aren't there?
Oh, yeah. When Dad worked in the government, basically, it was a much earlier time. I mean, he was there at the point of the Social Work Scotland Act and then after, and I suppose that was the birth of that kind of more generic social work movement in Scotland, and particularly it was rooted in local government and brought together a kind of number of disparate kind of professions, so psychiatric social work and almoners and child welfare officers and probation officers all brought together under social work. So the huge amount in terms of development, and it was the start of the regime around inspections. We had, I think when he was there, they had inspectors and since then, of course, we've now got a whole inspection agency called the Care Inspectorate in Scotland, and it's their job. So when my dad left and Angus Skinner took over, then there was a functions, and they created the Care Inspectorate, and then SSC, which registers that regulates the workforce itself. So all these different functions have devolved. They've evolved now. Originally, they were all under the one. And
you're a little bit. You're breaking up a little bit, Iona. Can you hear me? Okay, still.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
Okay, we
You
can
okay?
edit that. We can edit this
Yep.
little bit.
Right.
I, can you tell me just one thing? Put my mind at rest for one thing. Firstly, there's an apocryphal story about your dad. After he retired, he was asked if he would go and just be the director in Shetland for a year, just
Yeah.
to take that over. Now, I don't know whether this is just a made-up thing or whether it actually happened, but I'm told that he was instrumental in persuading the oil companies up there to pay a penny a barrel towards facility resources for disabled people in Shetland, and he actually managed to buy a number of specially adapted cars with the oil revenue. Does that ring a bell with you?
Sorry, don't know.
No.
It sounds like the kind of thing you would do, but I don't actually know if you did.
No, just a penny a barrel was just incredible if he did it. I mean, I wouldn't put it past him.
No. But I'm not, I don't know. He certainly was the director of social work in Shetland.
Yeah.
And yeah, he did lots of things like sailing and all sorts of things in Shetland as usual. But whether he did that, I don't know.
No, I'll look into that. He was very, very helpful to me. You talked about his influence in the politics and his knowledge of the political world, because he helped in the introduction of my introduction down in the House of Lords to Baroness Lucy Faithfull, who was a passionate, I don't know if you knew her, but she was a passionate woman, a social worker in the House of Lords, a firebrand and an absolute wouldn't take no for an answer sort of person. And she was heavily instrumental in pushing for the what became the 1997-8 Sexual Offences Act, and that created the Register of Offenders. And unfortunately, Lucy died just about a year or so before it actually became law. But she gave me space in the House of Lords, and David had helped to organise that, and so on, and introduce me to people. And it was just sort of that. Just always, I always remember that with him. That and visiting the first social work museum in Mulgai.
Oh yes, which I think the aforementioned Fred Edwards set up to do.
Yeah, I know, which was so quaint. It was just, it had like things like a sock and a glove, amongst a whole load of other obviously very important paperwork and stuff like that. But I think that's all been all transferred now. Which of the universities? One of the universities hosts it now, doesn't it? The social work museum.
Probably it'll be Strathclyde.
Strathclyde.
I think so. I don't know. I think it's Strathclyde, yes.
Your dad seemed, to, in my mind, to write a lot. Does that ring true, or was that just my imagination? That he actually wrote quite a bit in terms of actual kind of for things like Rostrum magazine for Baswa at the time, and so on, and other articles and stuff like that. Did you have in mind that he was a kind of an accomplished writer?
I don't know, to be honest. I'm not sure, because I think he did. I suspect that he did, and as a civil servant he would have. But it wasn't something I was that aware of. I suppose I was busy doing what I was doing, and he was doing what he was doing. So yeah, but yeah, I would have expected it. Certainly, he wrote quite often in the press and stuff. But and I would have expected him to do that, but. I don't know. I suppose I just took it for granted.
Yeah. Well, look, we're coming to sort of the end of the kind of time for now, but just can I ask you just one or two things before we finish?
Of course.
He always seemed to me to have a particular point of view, and at the drop of a hat, if I ever asked him, if he was sat where you are just now, and I said to him, what would you say to people that are contemplating going into social work today? He would have a ready answer, and I rather suspect that you would too. Would you? I mean, why don't we just say that? What advice would you give? What encouragement, if it, would you give to people that are considering coming into social work today? Because it doesn't always receive the best press, and yet lots of us know that it is, I think, a very valuable way of work. What would you say to these people?
Oh, I think it's still the same, that it's just become a bit more complicated, or it feels like it's a bit more complicated because the picture in England is very different to the picture in Scotland. But in both instances, I suppose there's much more specialism around whether you become a child care worker or a justice worker or a community care worker. But ultimately, it's the same thing that drives most social workers, which is basically wanting to make a difference. Every social worker I've ever met wants to make a difference. And that's what drives them forward, by and large. And I think that if you want a job that's sometimes challenging, but ultimately usually pretty rewarding, then social work's the right kind of job. And I know there's lots of different stresses and pressures just now on social workers, and the context is quite different across the UK. But ultimately, if you'd rather spend your time doing something that actually makes a difference to other people, then social work's still a profession to consider. And I would encourage anybody to join it in terms of getting something out of what you do.
Okay. Iona, thanks very much indeed for your time. And, I wish you all the best.
Okay, thank you very much.
Bill McKitterick also died this year. Incredibly sadly, he was a very young age. He was only in his 60s. And following a short illness, he passed away several months ago. Now, Bill was not just my friend. He was a social worker, and his career started back in the early 1970s. But he was committed to the profession. He was committed to the ideal of social work. He was committed to challenging managerialism in all its forms and actually making social workers stand up for themselves and their profession. Latterly, he wrote a couple of books following a long career of writing many, many articles. And these books were all about self-leadership and professional supervision. When I first met him, it was in the mid-90s, and so for 20 years I saw firsthand his commitment to his profession. He was Director of Social Services for Bristol for 10 years, and during that time he weathered a lot of storms, as directors do. He initiated a lot of good practice, as only some do, and he also shared my vision on opening up the profession to much more transparency and scrutiny. And in fact, he was amongst the first, if not the first, to really have allowed and persuaded others to allow the television cameras to come into the department. And in fact, the BBC made 3 one-hour documentaries following a team of frontline child protection social workers. And it was respectful, and people saw what could be done, and Bill was responsible for that. And I'm going to be eternally grateful because, as some of you know from previous podcasts and from my own position, that's very, very much a campaign and a cause that I believe in myself, the opening up of social work and the actual taking control more of the media rather than being just a responsive element and a defensive situation. And Bill was very much in line with that. Now, he actually was committed to the professional association, and he served in a number of positions in the British Association of Social Workers as well. He eventually, for several years, became the treasurer and was very a careful treasurer, but also a diligent one, and was terribly well respected. During that time, he also was heavily involved in arguing for the creation of the College of Social Work. I was, of course, thrilled when it happened, but terribly disappointed when it went the way that it did and didn't necessarily follow what he passionately argued for and what it should be. He thought it should start very modestly with a small structure and then expand as membership grew, but it kind of got a hold of itself and it became like a runaway train, and ultimately, as people in the United Kingdom know, it virtually collapsed. But he taught with me. We trained people together. We did courses on supervision together. And I could just see from his writing, from his passion, and from his engagement with the attendees at these conferences, just how much he actually believed in what he was saying. He wasn't just robotic. He actually had a big heart, and he transmitted that to the people that he talked to. He's been a champion for social workers, and he's been one of the top leaders in social services who never forgot where he came from. He never forgot the roots that he had in the profession and campaigned so strongly for social justice. He felt that social workers should all take individual responsibility, that they should remember that they are indeed individual professionals, and that they should challenge wherever possible and proper managerialism and bureaucracy where it took over unnecessarily and seemed to somehow or other disable the profession, stultify the work that was being done, the work that people trained for. So he was a real wise man. He was a really good friend of mine, and he leaves a family, a wife, 2 children, grandchildren, and the community is much poorer now, with Bill having moved on. He interestingly too had quite a sense of humour, and a very dry sense of humour, and a very kind of academic format to himself. But underneath all of that, he did have a heart of gold and a compassionate and caring person, more compassionate and caring person you couldn't find. So there we are. He's gone now, but he won't be forgotten. And he's not just left a legacy, a literary legacy, but he's also left a legacy amongst a whole cluster of friends, colleagues, and admiring students. So Bill, we'll miss you, just like we'll miss David Colvin. It's been a sad year, but I just hope that it won't be forgotten. And I hope that other people who might have memories of David and Bill will take the opportunity to let me know and reflect them, and I'll see if I can put some in future podcasts, because these leaders in our world really shouldn't be forgotten, and we should understand the things that we've learned from them, the wisdom that's come from them, and how they've helped us grow. So anyway, thanks for listening today. I'll be putting another podcast out pretty soon to do with forthcoming conferences that I'm part of. And as always, thanks to Alba Digital Media for the technical support in making this podcast. And please keep your comments coming. It really is fantastic. Whether you tweet me at Dave Niven, or whether you go to the LinkedIn side of it, or whether you just leave a message that you can do one click here on the podcast site itself. That would be really helpful. Thanks for listening. See you next time.